to make companies promise not to modify the system. It's 5 p.m. here in Seoul. Thank you for joining us on Arirang News. I'm Devin Whiting. South Korea's export prices last month were up compared to the month before, but so were import prices. The Bank of Korea says the export price index increased by 1% from July to almost 113. This was the 9th straight month of gains, although the speed of the increase slowed from the previous month. The increase in export prices was driven by higher prices of industrial products like chemicals. Import prices rose 0.6% on month, mainly on higher intermediate good prices, including primary metal products. South Korea's ICT exports last month had their best August on record, thanks to strong demand for semiconductors and displays. The Trade Ministry said Tuesday that ICT shipments came to $20.3 billion, up more than 33% on year. It was also the second highest on record for any month since September 2018. Semiconductor exports came to around $11.8 billion on the back of growing demand for mobile devices and computers. Display exports were up 22% to some $2 billion. South Korea's Samsung Group has pledged to create 30,000 new jobs for young people over the next 3 years. The plan was unveiled Tuesday at an event announcing a partnership between Samsung and the South Korean Prime Minister's office in support of the government's youth job and education program called Youth Hope On. Samsung will expand its existing corporate social responsibility programs and introduce a new initiative aimed at supporting young people in rural areas. It also plans to double enrollment at the Samsung Software Academy for Youth from the 1,000 a year currently to more than 2,000 starting next year. Tuesday's event marked the first public appearance by Samsung Group Vice Chairman Lee Jae-yong since his release on parole last month, serving a sentence for bribery. President Moon Jae-in has placed a pre-order for a mini SUV that debuts this Wednesday, produced under his administration's so-called win-win job creation campaign. The Blue House said Moon made the online reservation himself and plans to drive the car even after he leaves office next year. The new model, called Casper, was produced by Hyundai Motor under the win-win campaign. That effort brought together workers, employers, and the public sector in the city of Gwangju to build the local factory that's making the Casper. President Moon, the Blue House said, bought the car to encourage the success of such campaigns. South Korea's antitrust regulator has fined global tech giant Google for blocking the development of new smartphone operating systems based on its Android platform. It's another blow for the U.S. tech giant, which will no longer be allowed to make other companies promise not to modify the system. Also taking effect today is the law that made headlines for banning Google from forcing developers to use its payment system. Kim Chung-ah has more.
The Korea Fair Trade Commission has fined Google $176.8 million for blocking customized versions of its Android operating system. Google apparently hampered market competition by requiring smartphone makers, such as Samsung Electronics, to abide by an anti-fragmentation agreement when they sign key contracts over App Store licenses and early access to Android's operating system. Under this agreement, device makers can install modified versions of Android OS, known as Android forks, on their products, and can't develop their own Android forks either. And if they don't sign the agreement, they can't use key apps like Google Play Store. This has helped Google cement its monopoly in the market, stifling any room for development of new operating systems for smart devices. On top of the fine, the regulator has also ordered Google to stop forcing Android manufacturers to sign an AFA.
We expect the latest measures will help set the stage for competition to revive the mobile OS and app markets. This is also expected to help the launch of innovation goods and services in the smart device market.
Google has said in a statement that it intends to appeal, adding that the ruling ignores the benefits offered by Android's compatibility with other programs. It does not look like a good month for Google with an amendment to South Korea's Telecommunications Business Act, dubbed the Anti-Google Law, coming into effect on Tuesday, which stops tech giants from requiring that software developers use their payment systems. Kim Chang-ah, Arirang News.
The South Korean tech platform giant Kakao has pledged 300 billion Korean won, or about $250 million, to help small businesses, and has vowed to get out of businesses that compete with mom-and-pop shops. Kakao chairman Kim Bum-soo said Tuesday that the fund will be established in the next 5 years and that his family-run investment advisory business K-Cube Holdings will be turned into a social enterprise. K-Cube owns about 10.5% of Kakao and is currently the subject of a regulatory probe. Also, the Kakao affiliate under the most public scrutiny for allegedly hurting mom-and-pop businesses, Kakao Mobility, will stop some services such as delivering flowers and snacks. Kakao Taxi will end a service called Smart Call that let users hail a cab faster for a fee. And for designated drivers, Kakao will lower its commission for arranging rides. A SpaceX capsule will take off from Florida on Wednesday for the first completely private mission to orbit the Earth. The 4-person crew will spend 3 days in space at altitudes higher than the Hubble Space Telescope. Ian Jin reports.
On the evening of Wednesday, September 15th, the historic SpaceX capsule is set to launch the first spacecraft to orbit Earth with a crew of astronauts not trained by the government. Once reaching orbit, the Inspiration 4 crew will circle the globe every 90 minutes, traveling at roughly 28,000 kilometers per hour. The astronauts will reach an altitude of about 580 kilometers, that's higher than the International Space Station and the Hubble Space Telescope. The spacecraft is owned and operated by SpaceX, not NASA, and carrying out the mission are 4 civilian astronauts who have trained for months, all funded by billionaire entrepreneur Jared Isaacman, who will also be on board.
You know, it is the first time that a global superpower hasn't sent people up into orbital space. And I think that should send a message of all the things to come.
The other 3 crew members are a cancer survivor turned nurse, a geology professor, and a data engineer. None of them have ever been to space before.
And I remember getting off the phone and my hands were shaking. It was just so exhilarating. This is definitely not something I ever imagined would happen, but I think that's what it makes it so fun for me.
This Inspiration 4 mission is far more daring and dangerous than the recent suborbital space tourism missions taken by billionaires Richard Branson and Jeff Bezos, as it goes beyond traveling just a few minutes in a weightless environment. While the rocket is scheduled to take off from NASA's Kennedy Space Center, the space agency themselves will be bystanders to this mission, which will send the first fully commercial spaceflight to orbit the Earth. After 3 days, the crew will re-enter the atmosphere. They're expected to land in the Atlantic Ocean around Florida, where the SpaceX recovery teams will meet up with the capsule and bring the crew to shore. Ian Jin, Arirang News.
Time now for an in-depth look at the market news this afternoon, and for that I'm joined on the line by Mr. Daniel Yu, Global Strategist at Yuanta Securities. Mr. Yu, good afternoon. Thank you for coming on today.
Good afternoon.
Well, let's start with stocks on Wall Street. At about noon on Tuesday, U.S. time, we're going to get U.S. consumer price data, and that's widely expected to show inflation still running pretty hot. Ahead of that, stocks on Monday were mixed but mostly higher. The S&P and the Dow breaking their losing streak, but the Nasdaq down again. What's the story in the global markets?
Yes, if you look at the U.S. market, it continues to show some correction. It's been doing that for last about a week or so. Last week, most of the indices were down by somewhere between 1.6 to 2.5%. And main reason for that is because of this inflationary pressure that people are worried about. The PPI number, production price number came out, and that went up by 8.3% year on year. That caused concern about the overall operating profit margin to go down in the future. And if not, then inflation numbers will be coming in at much harder than expected. And already it's been showing about 5.2% year-on-year growth rate before. Now they're saying that the number should remain that high. It might not go down much further from what has been the very high number. So all in all, that is quite a negative news in the sense that the Fed will be accelerating its tapering, and also if that's the case, then people are concerned about the rate hike that might be coming in faster than expected. The previous cycle, 2 years later after the tapering started, rate hike started, but for this time around, people might be thinking that it will be less than a year later after the tapering started. On top of that, there's a concern about the U.S. President Joe Biden $3.5 trillion budget package might cause the corporate tax rate hike from 21% from 26.5%. If that happens, then it is a bigger risk for the high profitable companies, given the fact that a lot of these so-called FANG or MAGA companies are actually paying much less taxes on the basis of internationally operating. So that might cause some of the additional taxes for some of the major companies, and that is causing the concern, and therefore the NASDAQ was actually the only index that was down yesterday. All in all, I think that we need some breathing time for the next month or so because the U.S. market has risen from the beginning of this year to now by around 20% plus, and that seems to be too much ahead of the earnings cycle for the time being.
Well, switching gears for a second to oil, prices have rebounded over the past few weeks back to above $70 a barrel. Still some risks, though. Interestingly, Bank of America is one of those talking about $100 a barrel if there's a big freeze this winter again in the U.S. like we saw this past winter. What do you see happening with oil prices?
Right. As I said, the PPI numbers are rising for U.S., and it seems to be happening for everywhere else. And one part of that, obviously, is the oil price. And oil price now has reached above $70 per barrel once again. Now, of course, the short-term reason for that is because of the impact of the Hurricane Ida. That might cause the U.S. supply to be much weaker than expected. And maybe the demand is picking up with the COVID-19 issues dying out, with the vaccinations increasing to as high as 66% for U.S. All that resulting into demand and supply picture obviously pushing up the prices further. Yes, that might be the case for the short term. However, though, if you really think about the long-term perspective, we are moving away from oil to the renewable energies, and the overall changes are happening all over the world, and also changing gears to electric car from the overall the gasoline cars is actually happening much faster than previously anticipated. All being said, demand and supply picture might be quite well positioned where the prices might not be falling or rising that much. We've been saying that the oil prices should remain at a trading range somewhere between $65 to $75 range. We've been saying that, and that's because of the economy recovering in a nice pace. At the same time, there's a structural changes happening in the energy segment.
And today in the Korean markets, it looks like retail investors taking some profits, but foreigners and institutions buying pretty heavily. Both the Kospi and the Kosdaq with a nice bounce back of around 1%. Tell us about the domestic market.
Right. A lot of people have been, concerned about the market right before the holidays, the Chuseok holidays. And that's from Monday to Wednesday of next week. And as you know, the FOMC meetings are set at the 21st, which is right after the vacation period of Korea. So I guess most of the Korean retail investors are cautious, and that they're selling the index or selling the stocks before the vacation or holidays, and that is resulting into the net selling of the retail investors. However, though, if you look at the fundamentals of Korea, it seems to be doing very well on the basis of the export numbers as well as the overall economic growth numbers and the earnings growth rate of Korean companies, all is indicating that the Korean equity market is cheap relative to anywhere else in the world. So therefore, foreign investors are actually buying into this opportunity of the retail investors selling into the market. And institutional investors are doing exactly the same. So as of today, net selling by retail investors by almost 1 trillion won plus, whereas the foreign investors net bought about 300 billion won worth of it. Of Kospi, and also institutional investors were heavy buyer of about 760 billion overall. We think that the picture should be where right after the holiday seasons, we think that the Korean equity market is quite a good position to go up in the future.
And finally, Mr. Yu, Korea's export prices were up last month for an ninth month in a row. According to the BOK, an increase of 1% in August from the month before. Not an increase across the board, though. Certain metals and refined and chemicals were up, but refined oil products and farm produce were lower. What do you see happening with Korea's exports?
Well, if you look at the overall export prices as a whole, it has risen most since 2009. The Korea's export prices jumped 18.6% year-on-year in August of 2021, accelerating from the previous month of 17.4%. Clearly, so overall big picture is showing that the export prices are rising. As we've been saying that the production prices are rising globally, and the demand from the U.S. is picking up. Overall economic growth rate of global scale is actually picking up as well, and that resulting into overall prices rise. Yes, but though, as you said, of course, it really depends on which kind of product. And if you look at the so-called coal segment and petrochemical side and also the agricultural products, obviously that price is down because of the demand is obviously changing. As you know, the agricultural prices were down quite heavily in the last a few months. And also we've been saying that the coal is moving away from coal and then going into the new energies or renewable energies, and obviously the demand is changing. So that clearly indicates and shows what's happening to the global economy, and structure is changing in terms of the demand for products. We think that this kind of trend should continue with the retail investors or the retail individual consumers are showing a fairly good growth in the salaries and wages, and that results into strong demand for the consumer goods. And obviously, if that's the case, then a lot of the export prices related to Korean export prices should be showing continued strong numbers in the future, despite that it's been risen by quite biggest of 18.6% year-on-year in August.
All right, Mr. Yu, we'll have to leave it there for today. Thanks so much, as always, for sharing your insights with us. We appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
The chief U.S. nuclear envoy Sung Kim says Washington is prepared to work with North Korea regardless of the denuclearization process to address humanitarian concerns. Kim was speaking to reporters in Tokyo after Tuesday's bilateral talks with his South Korean counterpart No Gyu-duk. He said Washington supports the provision of humanitarian aid to the most vulnerable North Koreans, consistent with international standards for access and monitoring. Kim also pledged support for backing, quote, certain inter-Korean humanitarian cooperation projects. And during trilateral talks earlier in the day with the South Korean envoy and their Japanese counterpart, Takahiro Funakoshi, Kim reiterated Washington's offer to meet with the regime without preconditions. But he emphasized that the U.S. has to implement the UN Security Council resolutions on the North until Pyongyang gives a positive response. The head of the IAEA, Rafael Grossi, is urging North Korea to comply with its international obligations, following a recent report by the nuclear watchdog suggesting the North has restarted its nuclear activities. The IAEA chief called the situation deeply troubling. Kim Sung-min reports.
International Atomic Energy Agency Director General Rafael Grossi on Monday called on North Korea to fully comply with its international obligations to limit nuclear activities. He pointed to a report from the agency in late August that suggested a nuclear reactor remains in operation. In the report, there were indications of the operation of two North Korean nuclear facilities, the 5-megawatt nuclear reactor in Yongbyon and the site's radiochemical laboratory. According to the agency, the 5-megawatt reactor is widely believed to be at the center of North Korea's nuclear program, essential for producing plutonium for nuclear weapons. The Director General said the situation is deeply troubling to the IAEA and that North Korea's nuclear activities are causing serious concern. Urging North Korea to comply with its obligations under relevant UN Security Council resolutions, the agency assured that they remain ready to return to North Korea and play an essential role in verifying the nuclear program. The IAEA has had no access to North Korea since 2009 when the inspectors were expelled, and since then has been monitoring the country through satellite imagery. Kim Sung-min, Arirang News.
In other news, South Korea today has started administering seasonal flu shots. More than 14 million people are eligible to get them for free, including young children, pregnant women, and people 65 and older. Young children and pregnant women will be first in line. Some people will be getting their flu shots at the same time as their coronavirus vaccines, and experts say there are no particular restrictions on the interval between the two shots. But the authorities are recommending that people try to leave several days between shots as a precaution. And starting in Israel, a number of countries have been rolling out third shots of coronavirus vaccines, commonly known as booster shots. With the Delta variant a threat in many countries, even those with high vaccination rates, like Israel, some think a third shot after 5 months is needed to maintain efficacy. However, numerous scientists disagree, as our Kim Do-yeon reports.
The debate over the need for booster shots of the COVID-19 vaccine is heating up. On Monday, top scientists at the World Health Organization and two departing scientists from the U.S. Food and Drug Administration wrote in an article in the Lancet Medical Journal that booster shots are not needed for the general population. One of the authors was the WHO's chief scientist, who has been vocal for quite some time on the issue.
But on the science side, which we are tracking very closely, and we recently had an expert group meeting with scientists from around the world. This included researchers, it included regulatory experts from different regulatory agencies. There was consensus that there is no, that the data around the need for boosters is not conclusive.
The journal said that 6 months after getting 2 shots of the vaccine, the chance of hospitalization had only risen slightly for those over 75 years old. And that as for now, immunity levels after 6 months didn't show much difference. This goes directly against some of the decisions by countries around the world, including the US, where booster shots will be rolled out in a few days.
Of course, the decision of which booster shots to give, when to start them, and who will give them will be left completely to the scientists at the FDA and the Centers for Disease Control. But while we wait, we've done our part. We bought enough booster shots, and the distribution system is ready to administer them.
The authors of the journal added that booster shots coming too soon or too frequently could even be dangerous to recipients, and that using the supply to administer first shots to unvaccinated people would save more lives. Kim Do-yeon, Arirang News.
President Moon Jae-in on Tuesday gave official appointment certificates to South Korean boy band BTS, whom he recently named special envoys for future generations and culture. BTS will start their official activities as special envoys by taking part in the upcoming UN General Assembly next week. The group will be giving an address at an event called Sustainable Development Goals Moment. on the theme of overcoming COVID-19. The Blue House said that in private talks after today's ceremony, Moon said K-pop has enhanced South Korea's dignity and noted that it's become easier to start diplomacy by talking about BTS. The group's leader, RM, on behalf of the band, said the special envoy title is an honor and that BTS wanted an opportunity to give back the love they've received. And that brings us to the end of this newscast. Thank you for watching. More live news coming your way at 7 p.m. Korea time.